To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text the long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever.
Life is an act of constant reinvention. That's true for you and for cars. Nissan reimagined the all-new Kicks around you. The Bose Personal Plus sound system with speakers in the headrests keep you in the groove, while the Nissan Safety Shield 360 technologies keep you safe. If Nissan reinvented the Kicks, you can reinvent yourself. Drive the all-new reimagined Nissan Kicks today. Available feature. Bose is a registered trademark of the Bose Corporation. Nissan Safety Shield technologies can't prevent all collisions or warn in all situations. See owner's manual for important safety information.
Hello and welcome to mini episode 392 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And before we begin, just to let you know, there will be no main episode this Sunday because I am knee deep in preparing for 31 Days of Terror. If you're new around here and you don't know what that is, every day in the month of October I release new spooky content. We've done it for the last number of years. It's a bit of a marathon, but we get there. So there'll be no main episode this week, and 31 Days of Terror will start from Tuesday the 1st of October as per usual. And I have 3 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from the 13th of August 2024, and story number 1 comes from Anonymous. It occurred to me that you may be interested in a couple of strange stories involving my dad and a UFO sighting in my hometown in Waipukurau, Hawke's Bay in New Zealand. I now live in Melbourne, Australia. Way back in the early 1960s, before I was born, my mum gave birth to my brother, who sadly was severely disabled. The baby remained in hospital and wasn't well enough to come home. My dad had to go away for a business trip, and in the evening he was in the pub having a drink with a colleague. Dad says he tried to lift his glass from the table to have a drink, but he simply couldn't lift it. He went to call my mum and ask how the baby was doing. My mum told him she had been to the hospital and the baby was as well as could be expected. The next day the baby passed away. I recall Dad telling me some other stories. He'd had some psychic flashes in the 80s or 90s. My dad was then working as a farmer. He said he was in a paddock one day and he had a strong sense that the bull was going to charge him. Sure enough, Dad turned around and the bull was charging towards him. He says he also astral travelled at night, and one night dreamt that he was flying over the old local theatre. I am a member of the local Hawke's Bay Facebook group, and a few years ago was the 50th anniversary of a very strange occurrence at the local aerodrome. Late at night, the security guard was doing a check. It was reported that perhaps there was a dog on the loose, as the sheep in the paddock had been disturbed. He heard a humming noise, similar to the noise a vacuum cleaner makes. His own dog growled, and he spotted unusual reflections in the windows of a hangar. He turned to see 3 lights, 2 green separated by a red light, coming from something that appeared to be hovering about 20 metres above the ground. The humming appeared to also be coming from the large object in the air. The suspended object he estimated to be at least 20 metres across. It tilted towards him and then shot up into the air at an angle. He ran behind the hangar, but the object had vanished. He then measured 19 paces where the air above the ground appeared warm. Immediately below where he estimated the object had been hovering, the grass was warm and wet. He reported the incident at the local police station. He told the police that the object had headed in the direction of Pukiora, to the southwest of the town, in the direction where 2 farming families reported they had heard what they thought was a jet passing over. Quite separately, a farmer reported that his sheep had been unusually disturbed about the same time. And a visitor to Hawke's Bay driving State Highway 2 over Pukiora Hill towards Waipukurau and overlooking the aerodrome in the distance reported what appeared to be a dark object over the area on what was clear early morning conditions. The visitor reported that the object appeared to be circular and was stationary about 100 feet above the ground when he first saw it. Then it gradually gained height and abruptly took off southwards. I was a toddler in 1969, so obviously have no recollection of any of this. Some of my Facebook friends recall a lot of strange lights in the sky throughout 1969. Some of these lights were so bright they could be seen from inside their houses. I would love to ask my dad about this. He used to fly gliders at the aerodrome and would certainly remember this story. Sadly, my dad passed away in 2018. Some of this content regarding the UFO is from the Hawke's Bay Today newspaper. Just to say, I apologise if I pronounced any of those place names wrong. I do Google them. I Google them and do the whole YouTube listening to the pronunciation. But sometimes those aren't right, first of all. And then other times my brain just doesn't remember what the pronunciation was. So I apologise if I got them wrong. It sounds like your dad was kind of open to or susceptible to some strange stuff. I love weird, anomalous stories that are like an individual event. So not being able to lift the glass from the table is really interesting. You know, how does that happen? It's a glass that you are drinking a drink from. It's not suddenly going to weigh loads. Like, is it a psychological thing? Was it his like spidey senses picking up that he needed to speak to your mom and then being like, you know, you physically can't lift this drink until you go and ring her? It's just such a weird event that kind of defies all logic. But maybe, you know, in light of the other stories where he had some psychic flashes that were kind of life-saving in a way, maybe it was like a psychic flash that was physically stopping him from continuing to drink and nudging him to be like, you need to go ring, you know, your mom right now. And in regards to the UFO story, like, shut up. How are people like all over the world experiencing this and we're still no closer to understanding what it really is? I do genuinely think that some UFO encounters are just mistaken identity. Whether that is like military aircraft that we're just not aware of, or not aware of what it looks like doing certain maneuvers or at nighttime, or else it is like natural phenomena of lights in the sky. Like, yeah, fine. I think some of them definitely, misidentified. This is not a misidentification when somebody sees it so close and then multiple other people report the same thing. I'm tired of aliens and UFOs. I'm tired of the long game. I just want to know a definitive answer as to what all these things are. And story number 2 comes from Michael. I remember being afraid of demons and ghosts when I was very young, but it's difficult for me to trust my childhood memories. I grew up in a very Catholic family, and with an abusive father that makes me think some of my experiences may have been my young self just trying to make sense of my environment. In any event, the story I would like to share is actually something I don't remember at all, because I was too young, but something my mother told me about later. She told me that she came into my bedroom to check on me one night and found me awake but peaceful in my bed. She asked me if I wanted her to tuck me in, but apparently I told her something like, "No thank you, another lady who said she was the Virgin Mary already came to tuck me in." To my deeply religious mother, this story gave her great comfort. I find it unsettling. Michael, I massively respect the level of your self-reflection, you know, to be able to say, look, I grew up in a Catholic family, very, very Catholic, and I had an abusive father, and that makes me think that some of my experiences were seen through that lens and were me trying to make sense of my environment, right? And it takes a massive amount of self-reflection to be able to see that. Now, that doesn't mean that your experiences weren't paranormal, but it is important to also try and consider the context in which these things happened. And I totally understand what you mean about finding it unsettling. Like, for your religious mom, she must have been like, oh my God, amazing, the Virgin Mary is popping in to look after my child. You know, brilliant. Either that, or she's thinking, oh, you know, my little boy is connecting with the Virgin Mary, connecting with his religiosity in some way or another, right? Stunning, brilliant. But there's a disquiet that grows in me when it's like another lady who said she was the Virgin Mary came in to tuck me in. Oh, it does give me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. And I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's that old Catholic thing kind of mixed with that modern Hollywoodization of demons where it's like they can pretend to be anything. Or maybe it's that thing of childhood where, and I don't know if other people experience this, I'm sure they did, when Santa Claus was, coming to bring presents on Christmas Eve, I was petrified of Santa Claus. Like, obviously, loved him. He was bringing presents every Christmas Eve. I was like super excited about Santa Claus being there, but I was absolutely petrified of seeing him or petrified of accidentally waking up while he was in the middle of leaving presents. Like, I genuinely was frightened of Santa Claus. So maybe it's a similar thing, and maybe that's why you find it so unsettling.
To make switching to the new Boost Mobile risk-free, we're offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
So why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Because you have nothing to lose. Boost Mobile is offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
No, I asked why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Oh.
Wouldn't.
Because you love wasting money as a way to punish yourself because your mother never showed you enough love as a child?
Whoa. Easy there.
Yeah.
Applies to online activations. Requires port in and auto pay. Customers activating in stores may be charged non-refundable activation fees.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hey, it's Mark Marin from WTF here to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. And I'm sure the reason you're listening to this podcast right now is because you chose it. Well, choose Progressive's Name Your Price tool, and you could find insurance options that fit your budget, so you can pick the best one for your situation. Who doesn't like choice? Try it at Progressive.com. And now, some legal info. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
As dawn broke over the seven seas, the pirates of the Crimson Galleon set sail for adventure. But there was one problem. Paperwork. Mountains of it. Filing, invoices, you name it.
This work ain't fit for a pirate.
Luckily, their captain had an idea. She used the smart buying tools on Amazon Business so they could work more efficiently and get back to doing what they do best. I know, right? Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
And story number 3 comes from Rebecca. In the mid-2000s, when I was in my early 20s, my partner at the time and I purchased a renovation project in the form of a 2-bedroomed Victorian quarterback house, which is a back-to-back semi, basically. The house was near the end of a cul-de-sac called Station Road, named so because that little road was once the entrance to a Victorian train station that no longer exists. All that remained of the station was, at that time, just a boarded-up tunnel surrounded by acres of wild fields, and within the dense foliage, some vague hints at where the platforms and tracks had been. There were around 30 Victorian residences lining our side of the short dead-end street, while the houses on the opposite side were all sporadic additions of diverse styles built over the years. All the houses on our side were built using Yorkshire stone, soot-stained from the town's bygone industrial heyday. Our house faced street side, while the house behind us faced the then overgrown no man's land where the station once was. After having been in the property a few months, my partner and I moved into the spare room while we were renovating the master bedroom. The spare room was on the outer edge of the building, the nearest to the long-gone station. I noticed that just as I was dropping off to sleep, I would hear what sounded like a steam train chugging up to a stop. I went several nights without really registering this or thinking too much of it. It happened at around 11 p.m-ish, but whether the time was exact each night, I don't know. It was always bedtime though, just as I was dropping off, so I paid it little mind. Until one night, which was around the third or fourth time I'd heard it. That one night I was still quite awake, and I heard not only what sounded like a steam train chugging to a stop, but also this time steam releasing, and then what sounded like it starting up again a minute or so later, and it chugging off once more. It seemed particularly loud that night, and too real to ignore. I can't remember whether we had the window open or not, but I imagine we probably did, for the sounds to be so clear. Without knowing whether my boyfriend was asleep or not, I remember, like it was yesterday, saying into the darkness to him, "Did you hear that?" After a few seconds, his simple reply, "Yes," came in a very grave and serious tone. I was too bewildered to discuss the event any further in that moment, and the rest of our night was spent in silence and sleep. We weren't in that spare room very long, and were soon back in the master bedroom, where we never heard a peep. I did bring it up to my ex once more at some point, but he reckoned it was probably just the next town's train station. I disagreed, as the train station was miles away from us. Trains are electrified now, and even the closest side of that town to us, which had the town hall, was far enough away that we couldn't even hear the town hall's bells ring. What we heard sounded close and old-fashioned. But whatever, he was closed on the subject. A few months later, still pondering those few nights in retrospect and with no personal outlet for discussion, I submitted a short article to the local paper about the strange sounds. What came next was a knock on my door, and the couple to the back of us standing there with the newspaper in hand. "We hear it too," they said. I was made up. It was real, and we weren't the only ones to have heard it. They heard it regularly, they said. I moved out many years later, in around 2018. The little girl who lived next door in a separate building to ours and even closer to the old station grew up and got in contact. While catching up on life over email, I tongue-in-cheek mentioned the ghost train, and she wrote back saying that she used to hear it and that her dad, who still lives there, hears it to this day. Who knows how many other neighbours have heard it then? From what the girl wrote, it sounds like the sounds were ongoing too at her time of writing. So who knows, maybe even a listener hearing this recognises the area I'm alluding to and is spitting their tea out right now. In recent years, the tunnel has been reopened and is now part of a walking cycle route. I've been back there with my family through the day and walked through it. I didn't feel anything. It was just a tunnel, like the many other tunnels that have been reopened as cycling and walking routes within the hilly region of West Yorkshire recently. But then I never felt anything at the time either. I only heard. The reason this experience has stood out more than other more haunting type experiences I have had throughout my life is that steam engines do not have, and never did have, consciousness. It's led me into wondering whether these stone tape type anomalies are some kind of time slip, whether interactive human ghosts and spirits, where the body dies and the consciousness continues, is a totally different kettle of fish from accidentally being privy to something that is, for lack of a better word, soulless. Another thing I find interesting is that in the many anecdotes I have read or heard of phantom planes, trains, armies, etc., there tends to be only one physical sense exercised by the witness. We all heard the steam train, but no one has, to my knowledge, reported seeing it. An elderly gentleman once told me that while returning from a bombing raid on a Lancaster bomber during World War II, he and his crew saw a Lanc flying above them very closely. They noted its identifying number and then it seemingly randomly exploded and scattered to the ground in silence. After reporting it, they were informed that the Lanc in question had gone down 2 weeks prior. He said they never heard a sound and told me we had seen a ghost plane. Seen but not heard in that instance. I feel like I come across these one sense only experiences relatively regularly when reading about unexplainable events where no interaction is involved. Although this could just be confirmation bias, now that I've got the idea in my head. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on whether you feel these replayed recordings of the past are in a totally different realm of those that seem to have a soul attached, whether one is more to do with yet unproven physics and non-linear time, while the other, the visitations, the hauntings, are more spiritual. Personally, the more I look into it, the more I can't help but think that the word paranormal isn't quite the catch-all word that I had thought it to be in my younger years. Rebecca, this is absolutely genius. Writing a short piece for your local newspaper, of course. Like, obviously. What a great way to reach out to people and be like, this is a weird thing that I've experienced. Has anybody else experienced it too? For a really long time in my brain, I've been thinking about, like, there have to be hidden haunted houses in Canterbury. And I want to comment on Canterbury Residents Group asking for people's stories, but I'm really scared because residents groups are the pits of hell. But honestly, your theory is so interesting. And I mean, seeing and hearing trains is quite a common thing. And I guess you're right. It's never really occurred to me why this happens, because they are essentially soulless, inanimate objects. So why are people seeing and hearing trains regularly? And what's really interesting is when you talk about seeing and not hearing, or hearing and not seeing, that, you know, you experience this with a single sense, right? And you talked about the guy seeing a Lancashire bomber, but not hearing it, seeing it explode, finding out that it had exploded, it had gone down 2 weeks earlier. Like, that is fascinating. And when people talk about residual hauntings, they often talk about sound and not seeing. So they hear footsteps all the time. They hear doors opening and closing, but they don't see anything. They don't see an entity. And as time has gone on doing this podcast, I am more attached to the idea of time not being linear, and that some of these sightings, some of these things that people are hearing are moments in time that are being replayed for whatever reason. And then I think that you're right. I think things that seem to be intelligent and emotional, like visitations from family members, like poltergeist activity, that feels like something entirely different. Let me tell you, Rebecca, get your lab coat on, because there's a thesis in this somewhere. I'm not quite sure what the thesis is, but it's in there and you got to write it. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Anonymous, Michael and Rebecca for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from the 13th of August 2024. If you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.